My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today, the Church celebrates the great doctor of the Church, Saint Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican friar who lived between the years 1225 and 1275. Saint Thomas, who is known in a special way for his wonderful works of theology, but also of piety, who is called the Doctor Communes, meaning he's the common doctor of the Church, that he is the theologian that most people can go to, and we can learn from his teaching, his wisdom, and that he attempts to explain the faith in a very understandable way. Now, reading his works 800 years after he was alive makes it a little bit more difficult because of the time gap, but still this great saint, Saint Thomas Aquinas, can be a model for us, and we can learn from him, but not just learn from his teaching, but also learn from his life. I have to admit that early on, when I first heard of St. Thomas Aquinas, I didn't like him that much. Sometimes that happens in Jesus. This happens sometimes with your saints, that we maybe we don't hit it off right away, right? The communion of saints is a real fellowship. It's real friendships. But there are some times that there can be somebody with whom we may one day become a really good friend, but that we don't hit it off right away, and that things are a little rocky at the start. And for me, with the start of my friendship with St. Thomas Aquinas, I didn't like that it seemed at first, and this was when I was much, much younger, it seemed like he was only a saint because he was smart. And I think when we consider the saints, we sometimes group them into these types of categories or traits. And so this person is a saint because they were martyred, or this person is a saint because they founded a religious order, or this person, like St. Thomas Aquinas, is a saint because he's smart. And being smart oftentimes is a gift. Having a really quick intelligence, having the ability to really engage in speculative thought is a gift. It's definitely a gift from you, Lord. And so it just seems like that guy, he gets to be the smart one, and because of that, he gets to be a saint. And the rest of us, we're going to have to work for it. But my misconceptions about the saints were quickly rectified. No one gets to be a saint just because they're born more intelligent, or just because they're born with greater privilege or anything like that. No, saints become saints because they're holy. Jesus, the only way any of us can be a saint is by being in love with you, by being holy. And St. Thomas Aquinas was a man of tremendous holiness. And it can sometimes, as we flip the way we look at it, it can be sometimes even more difficult for someone who is intelligent, someone who's smart, someone who's written a lot of books, to be holy, because the temptation to pride, to arrogance, can so easily creep in. Every vocation has its temptations, and for those that are engaged in intellectual work, the pride and the arrogance that we can be a know-it-all is very much present. And so, Jesus, we need to ask for real, deep holiness, and see that our holiness lies in following you, in being a disciple, not just in being really smart, not just in writing all kinds of books, and somehow if we have a big enough curriculum vitae, we're going to get into heaven because look at everything I've done, Jesus. No. Rather, it's that I love you, and it's that I've acted out of love for you. You, in fact, say this, Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. It's not just saying nice things that get us to heaven. Rather, it's doing love. It's doing loving actions, that we have to have acts of love. There's a story from the life of Saint Jose Maria where he was very busy and he was doing a lot of things, but in his prayer he would be like, Jesus, I love you. Jesus, I love you. Particularly when he was distributing communion to a group of nuns one day. Jesus, I love you. Maybe even I love you more than this nun, right? I want to. Jesus, I love you. I love you. And he heard in his soul and had a real grace to hear that obras son amores y no buenas razones in Spanish. It's love is deeds and not just sweet words, right? Love really comes down to how do we act as we follow you, Jesus, and not just having nice, sweet words, not just having a lot of words. St. Thomas Aquinas, in his life, lived that. He lived out of love. He totally gave himself over to you. He made a very radical decision as a young man. He was supposed to be being set up to be the prior one day, or the abbot of the monastery of Monte Cassino, one of the most famous monasteries in the whole world. And he was going to be the abbot. His family was very influential, and so he was taking his Benedictine classes there to be a Benedictine monk. And then he had to leave that because of some political issues. But he still could have gone back to that, and he could have been a very, very powerful, influential, and comfortable church figure by being the abbot of Monte Cassino one day. But he chose as a young man to leave all that behind and to follow a relatively new group of people living radical fidelity to Jesus, the order of preachers, the Dominicans after St. Dominic. And today the Dominicans are a religious order spread throughout the entire world with a tremendous reputation, but in St. Thomas's day they were brand new. And so what is he doing, leaving one of the oldest, most prestigious monasteries in the entire world to follow this group of begging students? That just seems very foolish, and his family rejected him and even had him kidnapped for that because he wanted to follow you, Jesus. And he persevered, and he stayed faithful. And eventually he fled his captivity and stayed faithful to you and lived this life of a holy, preaching religious. And he was a university professor for a number of times in his life, but also he would just go on preaching missions and just be regular Brother Thomas, not the great chair of theology at the University of Paris, but just Brother Thomas, going and preaching the gospel and walking from place to place and helping the young Dominicans learn how to study theology. And so a lot of his works, particularly his Summa Theologiae, came from this desire to help those around him want to know more. Thomas Aquinas was a saint because he loved you, and he acted out of love, not just with sweet words and not with a lot of words, but out of a real love. And even being one of the greatest theologians in the history of the church, he saw the whole work of theology with so much humility. As he was dying, they wanted him to keep writing. He's brilliant and he's dying, and they want him to keep writing and keep giving. And he said that he can't. At a certain point, he couldn't, because compared to what he had seen in his times of prayer with you, Jesus, these mystical experiences he was having at the end of his life, he said that everything that he had written just seems as so much straw. Now, we may hear that and say it seems like nothing, right? So we shouldn't read what he wrote because it's just straw. But straw has a very important purpose. It's not for nothing. Rather, when a grain of wheat is growing, it's the straw that helps prop it up. And so when we are seeking to grow in love of God, the straw of good doctrine helps prop up our knowledge of God. It helps prop up that eventual love of God. So we do have to study, we do have to learn, but that's a support. It's not an end in itself, but it's a support in order to help us come to love God more. We know God more so that we can love God more. This is what St. Thomas Aquinas teaches us. So today, as we celebrate this great saint, we ask Jesus that we may follow his example and come to know you with real humility, but always seeking to know you more, that we can put what we know into practice in acts of great love for you. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations which you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.